Before the period of exploration, the main focuses on the world was in the Eastern Hemisphere. This was due to the majority of civilizations and empires occurring within the Eastern Hemisphere: Egyptians, Greeks, Mayan, and such. In the Western Hemisphere, society is mainly hunter and gatherer and simple farming. There wasn't too much things that were developing. The main civilizations were the ones in Latin America, them being the Mayans, Aztecs, and such. With the new interactions between both hemispheres, racism and social Darwinism began. Europeans saw the natives as inferior. Before, social status was based on where one was born and their class, but then it was based on the race. What still stayed the same was that there were still hierarchies and caste systems to separate the pureblood and the savages. There was more and vast goods to be traded, places to imperialize, and trade routes to be made. The fusion also became more apparent with the Columbian exchange and trade routes. Islam continued to spread to parts of the world, but its main expansion occurred during the post-classical era. Christianity spread through the Columbian exchange and through trade and imperialism. Islam has spread through Southeast Asia. Due to this, many new syncretized religions were formed, as well as some were reformed. Sikhism takes inspirations from Hinduism and Islam. Vandu originated in Africa with inspirations from Christianity. During this time period of 1450 to 1750, there was a surge of maritime exploration, mainly in Europe and Spain. The explorations had led to ideas being diffused and technological innovations being constantly advanced. This was also a way for the regions to get connected to trade routes. The motives from Europeans could be broken down to wanting to find the Northwest Passage, which they believed was a direct and efficient route to the Orient, home of spices, silk, and wealth, spread Christianity, and to gain political powers. European powers had begun to explore the oceans more with the use of technology, such as astrolabes, wind patterns, and different types of ships from Asian and Islamic countries. One of the reasons for European success with maritime exploration of the Indian Ocean was how they were able to adapt and utilize the technology of other neighboring countries. Portugal had become focused on maritime trade and exploration, and had become one of the biggest oceanic powerhouses. Portugal's rise after the death of Prince Henry the Navigator, he had kick-started the want of marine exploration when he had wanted the vast gold in Africa. His contributions had improved Portugal's weaponry and marine technology. That it eventually led them to dominate trade in the Indian Ocean through firepower. However, they weren't able to catch up with the European counterparts. Spain had begun to change. Many sailors and explorers began to have voyages and explorations across the sea. Ferdinand Magellan was the first to circumnavigate the globe, but since he died, his crew was technically the first to do so. Bartolomé had rounded the Cape of New Hope in South Africa, but decided to go back. Vasco da Gama had finished the trip and sailed to India. Zhang He was a Chinese mariner and explorer of China. He was known for his 7 expeditions that had expanded into the Indian Ocean region with the naval voyages, which enhanced Chinese prestige to expand Chinese trade and exploration. During this time, China was one of the biggest countries in manufacturing quality goods. They had wanted to export rather than import, so Zhang He's expeditions became trade-focused and to expand China's image. Columbus' ships were dwarfed in comparison to the treasure ships, in which Zhang He had led over 27,000 men. He had traveled along the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, Africa, and India. However, his expeditions came to an end as the Yongle Emperor, who had sponsored most of his voyages, had died. The new emperors felt that there wasn't a need for maritime exploration, but to defend China from nomads. Eventually, Zhang He died in 1433.
The famous explorer was Christopher Columbus. He had convinced Isabel of Spain to let him make the voyage to find a quicker and shorter way to India. Columbus' exploration has led him finding islands near North America in 1492. When Columbus did make it to the Caribbean island, he had found the Native American population. Their interaction was what led the Columbian Exchange, where food, plants, animals, and people were exchanged between the New World and the Old World. Oceanic trade routes was much more successful than the Silk Road or land-based trade. Using the patterns of wind, sailors can essentially make it to other regions much faster than on camelback. With ships, merchants are now able to carry things that wouldn't fit on a camel's back. One of being timber, which led to people being able to build better houses. Once other trade routes had still flourished, but not as well as before. This will slowly lead to a decline as ocean trade began to flourish more than land-based ones. The Columbian Exchange had beneficial and negative effects. The disease was the worst effect, as the indigenous population of the Western Hemisphere were exposed to diseases like measles, influenza, etc. Their population was diminished as 90% of them had died to diseases. This is one of the factors that led to Hernan Cortez, and Francisco Pizarro's victory of the Aztec and the Inca. Despite the conquistadors having a rather small army and superior weaponry, they were able to imperialize Latin America. The Europeans came to America with three intentions, three G's: God, gold, and glory. The Europeans spread Christianity to Native Americans but did not adapt Native American beliefs. The Columbian Exchange's main effect on the spread of religion was that it brought Christianity to the New World. The Native Americans had practiced syncretism, adapting their culture and Christianity. However, the missionaries and conquistadors weren't fans of syncretism and destroyed their temples and places of worship. This is a reflection of the spread of Christianity. While some places accept Christianity as a religion, most places were imposed to practice Christianity. Europe was affected in many ways by the exchange. The discovery of a new continent and riches and goods that can be traded had inspired other European countries to do the same. This would eventually lead the British and French establishing colonies into the New World. The settlers exchanged the environment in the Americas because they began to work the land more vigorously than the Native Americans. This resulted in less ecological stability and erosion of land. Animals were deliberately brought over: horses, cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, and chickens. Animals brought to the Old World from America include turkeys, llamas, alpacas, guinea pigs. There was also a new introduction of plants. Because Native Americans did not rely on meat as much as Afro-Eurasians, their plants were much more efficient in terms of calories. Because of this, when Europeans brought home food, such as potatoes and maize, there was a population boom as people started to take in more calories due to increased efficiency of the crops they consumed. Due to trade being more prosperous during this time, merchants were one of the most important types of people. They were the ones, as merchants' profits increased, and governments collected more taxes. Funding for the visual and performing arts, even for popular audiences, increased along with the expansion of literacy and increased focus on innovation and scientific inquiry. This had led to the visual arts were vastly improved. This included with the Renaissance art, new practices of art, performing science, and literacy began throughout the world. There were many factors that affected the change of agriculture from 1450 to 1750, such as the mini ice age in the temperature got much colder, crops were harder to plant, which affected the health of people. Famines became more apparent, and diseases were spread. Trading slaves became more common during the 1500s, but the greatest impact was now use of plantations and cash crops. Cash crops was like sugar, and tabaconus was everywhere, and people had to find new ways to grow them as quickly as possible. Agriculture was now a social and economic situation where people had become a social problem as Europeans had demanded cheap labor supply to work on their plantations, leading to Atlantic slave trading and the triangular trade system. The triangular trade was in the shape of a triangle, hence the name it connected Africa, Americans in Europe, leading to Atlantic slave trading and the triangular trade system. The triangular trade was in the shape of a triangle, hence the name it connected Africa. Americans in Europe manufactured goods were sent to Africa in exchange for slaves. Slaves were sent to the Caribbean and American mainland. American products were shipped to Europe. The slaves that were traded resulted in economic benefit. It allowed cheap labor during this time. Plantations and cash crops were the best economic way to benefit a country. So slaves were shipped from Africa to North America and Latin America. Slaves were traded for weapons, gold, and quality goods. The treatment of slaves were terrible. There was racial segregation towards the slave, and they were slowly seen as less than people. This became a reason to justify enslaving them. Sugarcane became one of the biggest cash crop productions. Sugarcane was brought into the Caribbean by the Spanish early on. The demand for sugar in Europe grew, and it was more convenient and potent sweetener than what was available to them. The Portuguese introduced the plantation system in Brazil to grow sugarcane. Then, in the early 17th century, a discovery was made that dramatically increased cultivation of sugar. Plantation slaves discovered that molasses, a byproduct of the product sugar that was often discarded, could be distilled into alcohol. This new product, rum, meant that sugarcane could produce two highly profitable products had virtually no waste. Damn. Entire forests were cleared to grow sugarcane, and the plantation system proliferated across the Caribbean. This in turn created a tremendous demand for slaves. The cash crop of sugar increased the slave trade of the
Natives and African Americans would work in farming, factories, and as personal workers for the conquistadors. They were seen as the inferior races, so they were forced to do the manual work because of the increase of agricultural productions. This caused the Atlantic slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade affected African societies as it forced millions out of their homes, spread smallpox, and brought great wealth and technology to Africa. Economically, there was cheap labor and there were more markets in the new colonies. Many benefited from slavery as countries gained profit from cheap labor. This was different than before because slavery was within the tribes, which later became hubs for slave trade. Slavery changed to suffice slave trade demands. Slavery would become a source of income for Africa. This time period's economic order affected the social, economic, and political elites because it directly benefited merchant class due to increase in trade. The separation between powerful elites, servants, and slaves deepened as the rich were richer, but the lower class didn't change their social position. Due to rise of aristocracy, power shifted from important members of social groups to smaller family units, who were wealthy and well-connected. Important Natives and African Americans would work in farming, factories, and as personal workers for the conquistadors. They were seen as the inferior races, so they were forced to do the manual work because of the increase of agricultural productions. This caused the Atlantic slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade, people would lose their social status. Because of these changes, gender roles were changed. There was an increase in women rulers during the 16th century. They were often more respected during these times. Women were still seen as a man's property, however. Since aristocracy was increasingly favored by society, the family unit became more prominent. Rulers like those in Islamic empires would listen and advised by their wives or daughters. To sum everything up, there would be specific tribes that would either have a role to benefit the Europeans or due to arrival of slaves and immigrants, new societies and social hierarchies developed in Americas based on race. Native American societies were at the bottom because European elites kept conquering their land and exploited natural resources. European conquest also enabled new leaders to rise in Americas, like powerful Native Americans.